How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today we are going to be talking about the feeling of obligation and how inmates can use that against us. So this is going to be a manipulative tactic that most people may not be aware is being employed. This is a very slow-moving, subtle tactic, and it's very strategic in how it is employed. It looks like it's something small at first, but again, it evolves into something very big. Now, of course, we have the new co-host, pretty much. Her name is Connie Alleyne. Connie Alleyne, where is the love today?
Hello. Hi, Connie Alleyne here, founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy, and I am the host of The Fly Behind the Wall and Crucial Conversations with Connie. I'm so glad to be here again.
Wait.
It's Conversations with Connie. Come on.
What did you just add to that?
The crucial part.
Hey guys, you guys check out the podcast though. It's great information, but I didn't know. When was it always Crucial Conversations with Connie?
No.
So when did we decide that crucial became a necessity?
I don't know. It just comes out every time. And I don't know if I just think about the book. Have you ever read that book, Crucial Conversations?
With Connie?
No, there's a book actually called Crucial Conversations. It's an amazing book.
That's the first time you ever said Crucial Conversations. You saw me turn around. I'm like, wait a second. That's Connie 101. Now we're at the next level. Connie levels it up. So guys, this is a very important dialogue. Obviously, all jokes aside, obligation can make the whole facility be vulnerable, but it starts with you first realizing that you're being played. So we're going to kind of talk about what we mean by feeling of obligation. How do you know you have that feeling of obligation towards an inmate? What can cause feelings of obligation? And then just basically ways to make sure it doesn't happen to you. That's the key of having this discussion. So guys, now if you haven't, the show Tier Talk to you, brave men and women that work in corrections, so please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. The bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We'll go to our sponsor. We come back. Let's talk about obligation.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Guys, Inmate Manipulation is a course that is highly needed. It's the process that's so slow-moving and subtle that you don't realize it's happening. When inmates choose to manipulate, they manipulate our need to react. Situational awareness and insight is going to save your career. It's going to save you from doing foolish things. Listen to your gut. So the more insight we have, the more we can recognize what isn't so overt, and we can correct our behavior before we fall into a trap that we can't get out of. If you allow an inmate to pull you out of your prescribed role, you are opening up a door for a host of problems. Inmate Manipulation, the psychology behind inmate manipulation. Available now. Link in description. All right, guys, and we're back. Guys, don't forget the Tier Talk has a podcast. We release them every Friday. Last week we did one with Connie, actually, with Connie and Russ. It was a great episode, very good dialogue. And also, guys, if you get a chance, check out the video we just dropped before this about burnout. It's a great discussion. I think it's starting to hit home with people because it's at 700 views. So, I mean, I read comments where people were burned out the first day they entered the profession, so, yeah. So, but definitely a lot of good interaction from that video. So I'm going to start off. Usually I would ask Connie to start off, but I'm going to start off and tell you what I mean by obligation. So let me do that, and then I'll have Connie further the definition. So obligation, it's actually a technique that's used by people that are in sales. It's a persuasive technique, believe it or not. It comes from one of the 6 laws of influence. And basically it is, I do something for you in an effort that you're going to do something for me. There's no pro bono here. It's, I'm going to do something for you, and then you're going to do something for me. And I'm going to tell you something, guys. The feeling of obligation is a feeling that we want to alleviate. So it makes sense that if someone does something for me, I'm going to want to pay them back. And inmates are aware of that. So as we go further into the dialogue, we're going to talk about certain words that they may use that can imply what they're doing is to try to earn that sense of obligation. And again, it's something that is very slow and subtle, and it's very strategic. So this video is very important that you understand how it can be employed and why it can be employed. So Connie, when I say obligation, especially related to the medical side of things or just the civilian side of things in general, how would that relate to the civilian side? Where do you feel that an inmate can try to get you to feel like you owe them something?
For us, we have some informal interactions with the population. So if, for me, for example, I experience the offenders cleaning the office area, right? Oh, Miss Alleyne, I'll take this out for you. Would you mind doing this for me? It's not like one of those pushy, demanding sort of requests, but it's, you know, something that seems seemingly harmless until it becomes something that they're expecting you to do in exchange for them doing a good job. So if I clean up your office, I make sure even on an off day, the clinic is clean or the garbages are empty, or if we have a staff gathering in the back area, I'll make sure that it's all clean for you. But then if I come and ask you for something, there is this expectation that you're going to do it. And I think because we do have these informal exchanges, sometimes they can lead to things that you just shouldn't be going down the path of.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny. You're 100% correct, because the inmate knows that there's a feeling that I do for you, you do for me. So, and sometimes it comes in across of, hey, I'll do it for only you, Connie, you know, and then in return, Connie's like, well, first off, why are you doing only for me? That's one thing. Or sometimes they'll employ the word favor. Hey, I'll do you this favor. That's usually not my job, but I'll do it. And what we tend to do is, if I ever get a sense that an inmate's trying to play that obligation route, like, hey, I'll do it only for you, Gangi, the first question I'm going to ask is, why only for me? But eventually it's going to lead to the removal of that inmate. I just like to find out things before I remove the inmate. Or if I hear them utilize the word favor. Now, this is not a favor. I gave you a directive, but at this point here, you know, because even if you think about it, I've given you an order, and you're going to tell me that you're only going to do it for me, or you're only going to do it as a favor for me. You're not 100% listening to the directive I gave you. Technically, you're doing the directive on these standards. I'll do it for nope. So either way, you're already sort of disobeying that direct order, but implementing it as I'll do it for you. No, you're doing it because I told you to do it. I've had civilians that, after I taught this class, the moment an inmate came up and said, you know, hey, I'll do you the favor, I'll do you the solid, they did the right thing and fired the inmate. But they told me this was something that they didn't look into as deep before. But now that they see it happening, they were curious as to even ask the inmate, why are you saying it's a favor? I just gave you an order. Like you're right. You know, why are you saying that you're going to do it just for me? Or why are you saying that, you know, you're doing a favor for me? No, I told you what to do. And Connie, I don't think sometimes when it comes to civilians, or even custody, by the way, it goes both ways, that they may not realize that that word favor, or I'm going to do it just for you, is being strategically employed.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that just the inference that I'm going to do it just for you establishes there's some sort of relationship between you and that person. And so for me, I've always sort of redirected that energy, because it's not just for me. So like, if you're cleaning up the clinic, it's because it's your job, right? It's not because you're doing it for me. You're taking out the trash because you are the appropriate person for me to ask to take the trash out, right? Like, but I think sometimes we gloss over, because it's a little uncomfortable, we may gloss over those words and we sort of dismiss that it was said. But we have to correct that, because if you don't correct it, you have the offender thinking now that there is a just between me and you situation going on, which can be misleading to that offender, but also to the people who are around you who hear this offender saying, I'm going to do it just for you. Because they're now wondering what kind of relationship you got with this person that they're going to just do this for you. Why is it that you can ask them to do something that's special, where it's really not special? It is within their scope, or whatever you're asking them to do, they should be doing it. Because outside of that, then you shouldn't be asking.
Well, think about what you just said. Perfectly well said, Connie. Is the fact that you gave out a directive that expects 100% compliance, which means that you're in control. They sort of take that control from you when they turn it back and say, I'll do you as a favor. I'll do it just for you. And then when you accept it, you kind of accept that submissive position. I mean, but guys, let's be honest, guys. I know it seems like we're going really deep, but this is the games that they play, you know? So you have to understand how what they do affects us mentally. But you're 100% right, Connie, in the fact that I'm going to go ahead and give you that order. Hey, get this done for me. That's my 100% control. That's the fact that get the job done. I can even say please. I'm not saying not to be cordial, but the key is that there's an order here. Get it done. Now, when the inmate turns around and says, well, I'll do it just for you, or I'll do it as a favor, what are they saying? That it's a special circumstance and that they're in control, because technically they could say no to what you're asking. No, when it's an ethical order, by the way. So you regain that control back by catching on to that and saying, hey, I gave you an order. You're going to follow the order, or this isn't a favor. You know, and I know some people think, oh, it's socially unacceptable to, oh, it's such a good gesture. It's not. There's meaning behind it, and you can't be afraid to catch that inmate and say, hey, listen, this wasn't a favor. I'm not planning on paying you back, you know, because that's what a favor implies. You know, I do for you, you do for me. There's no payback here. I gave you an order, do the order. And for the officers or for the civilian staff that may think it's not that big of a deal, look what I just said prior, and look what Connie was bringing along, was the fact that you accepting that is submissive. It's actually giving over that level of control back to that inmate. I mean, I believe that's what it is. And I see you nodding. You agree, Connie?
So I do agree. Like, I feel like that level of control is something that's always being pressed, or it's always being tested. And so I think as we are comfortable in our environments and we're comfortable with being able to engage with the offender population, that we have to get comfortable with setting boundaries and really establishing what's appropriate. And so when you have an offender who's sort of starting to take some liberties, right? Because if you feel like you could tell me that you're doing me a favor, or you feel like you could say no to something, I think that already means that that offender feels like they're in a position of power. And if you don't acknowledge that they feel like they're in a position of power, you end up doing things that you don't realize that you're doing. Like if you say, oh, sure, no problem, don't worry about it, right? Like, no, it is a problem, and you should worry about it, because I think what I've learned is that those requests only escalate. And so if you didn't say no at the onset, you begin to send the message that you're okay doing things that are not necessarily within the scope. And if you don't correct it, you know, it's always my fear that that offender is going to continue to press you for favors because you've done them in the past. You've sort of set the precedence, and you've almost acquiesced all of your power. You've said, here, take the power, and we're on level playing field, when in fact you're not.
Hey, Connie, first off, that was spot on, because you know what? There's some staff members that when they give the order, the inmates will do it no question. And then there's some where the inmates, they may get an order, they may feel to go back and tell staff, well, I'll do it for you this time, or kind of question, you know, the ability, I want to say the ability for that person to give the order technically, but they're questioning the power of that individual. And I think sometimes we have to look at ourselves, and what you mentioned was spot on. If an inmate's coming to me and saying, I'll do it for you, or I'll do it as a favor, but they're not doing that to everybody else, then I'm going to go back and start questioning myself and wondering what it is that I'm not doing, or what it is that I'm not doing correctly, because obviously that inmate feels that they're able to, because that, to me, I'm still saying it's a question of a directive, giving you a directive, and you're kind of giving me a little bit of a challenge towards that. And another thing I want to add as an officer's perspective, I don't know if you get this on the medical side, but as I was driving home, me and you were chatting, and we were discussing how some inmates will come out of the blue and tell the officer that's working the unit, hey, supervisor's en route. You know, and all of a sudden, you know, the officer may sometimes, even though they're not doing nothing wrong, they may decide to randomly clean up stuff. I don't know, just change whatever's happening, even though the officer's not doing nothing wrong. For the officers who let the inmates say that, for the officers that allow the inmates to be that lookout, look what that's saying. First off, the inmate comes up and gives you a solid, hey, the supervisor's coming. But why does that matter? You shouldn't be doing anything, that the supervisor, like you should be in point regardless if the supervisor's watching you or not, right? So if a supervisor's coming and an inmate was coming and say, hey, Gangi, a supervisor's coming, I would probably say, so let him come. I mean, I'm not going to go and try to clean up an act because I'm not doing anything foolish, but the inmate is doing it for a couple of reasons. One is to gain favor to you, but also maybe to highlight a possible divide between your relationship between you and that supervisor. Because think about this. The moment an inmate comes up and says, hey, a supervisor's en route, and then you as an officer feel the need to change what you're doing, there's a little bit of an integrity concern there, maybe an honesty aspect, and the inmate seeing that. You're giving the inmate a lot of ammunition, but you're also telling the inmate that you don't trust your supervisor to some extent, So people may not realize that the inmate, it's not about the inmate doing you a favor. First off, we don't want that, but the inmate's also highlighting some form of division that they're able to say, hey, a supervisor's en route, and all of a sudden you clean up your act, and then maybe even possibly say to the inmate, hey, thank you for telling me. I mean, you ever get something similar to that with your staff where inmates decide to, what do you have? Do you have something where inmates do that?
So, I mean, the way my office was situated, I was sort of like in a back area. So like you had to have keys to come into the back area where we sat. And, I'd have workers come in just casually passing through. They'd be like, oh, the warden's walking, right? Oh, the warden's on his way back to you, Connie. Like, so to me, it's like, so what? I'm sitting in my office, I'm working, and we had a great relationship. And I don't know it. I always I've never said thank you to that. And it's not until we're having this conversation that I'm like, oh, good thing you didn't say thank you. What message would you have been sending if you did say thank you? I'd be like, all right, but it was never like a good looking out, right? Because what are you looking out for? Or what is that heads up you're giving me? I don't really need it. And quite frankly, I'm going to get that call from the officer in the clinic anyway. Who's going to say, hey, the warden's on his way back. So it really didn't matter, but it was really just one of those things that I think that's part of, I would gander to say, the prison culture, right? There's always a lookout, right? Whether we want to look at it that way or not, there's a lookout. And so in this instance, you've got custody or administration sort of looking like the bad guy. And, I'm going to give you a heads up that they're coming. And it's not a requirement. And I think when we neutralize that requirement, we kind of stop the offenders from trying to divide us.
Yeah, because it is divisive. I'm thinking, imagine if an inmate winds up getting caught doing something by the supervisor, then they come back to you. It's like, dude, I always tell you the supervisor's coming. You don't tell me. All jokes aside, but, favor for favor, sort of.
But could you imagine that? Really?
But it sounds weird, but, they're expecting something out of that. And even if they're not, the message that, okay, it's okay to do that. And then your reaction to it says a lot about your relationship with that supervisor. You know what I mean? That's why I think the great answer, because I posted it on my board, was the best answer is so. Supervisor's coming. So, there are some times where we may be forced to be in a position of obligation. That's where management has to protect us. And that could be in the case of an inmate saving a civilian's life or saving an officer's life. And that could put a tremendous obligation that could really affect the civilian or the officer's ability. Oh, yeah, you're muted. Wait, do I finish my thought, Connie, or it's all right, you can ask the question.
No, the question, you made me think just now. So what do you do in those instances when you have intel? You have someone who
yeah, because you're 100% correct. Actually, so because that's where there's a feeling of obligation you don't want it to be a feeling of obligation. But that's why sometimes people pay off the intel by giving them candy or some crazy stuff, which I'm not 100% for. And we'll get to that. I don't think intel should be rewarded because it questions the motivation of the inmate doing it. Some of the best intel I ever got was because inmates related to me and trusted me with it, but never asked for anything in return. And then again, I was still, whoever gives me the intel, I'm going to look in on them too. I mean, I'm going to investigate everything because I want to know why you're giving it to me. I'm not someone's puppet. You know what I mean? You could be telling me to do something because you're running something. But when it comes to also that feeling of obligation, you know, management sometimes has to realize that, like, if you have a staff member whose life was saved by an inmate, that staff member may feel automatically obligated to that inmate. And sometimes some facilities have recognized that obligation is such a powerful feeling that they allow the staff member or the institution themselves to put either something into the inmate's account, maybe speak on their behalf, or if worse comes to worse, transfer the inmate out of the facility, both for the inmate's safety, but as well as the officer's ability to manage said inmate. Because, you know, if you have an inmate that just saved your life, I'll give props for people that can stay professional, because don't get me wrong, people could still stay professional. But when it comes to having to write that inmate up for doing something foolish, I could picture some staff saying, ooh, that's going to be tough because this inmate just risked his life for me. Now, with that said, sometimes inmates could play that too. They could set it up, save your life in the hope that you are put into a position of obligation. That's why management needs to do whatever they can to alleviate that by, again, best case scenario, if they have to, ship that inmate out, because that's the best way for the safety of the inmate, but also for that staff member to maintain eliminate that feeling of obligation. But now when you talked about the intel, that's why when it comes to intel, that's a total, if the inmate's giving you the information, that's automatic feeling of obligation, obviously. So there should be a way to neutralize that. But sometimes the information comes without you asking for it. In most of my cases, that's what happened. Like, I'm not there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I'm not going to know the right questions to ask to get some of the intel I got in my career. I'm just going to know because stuff was volunteered my way. But again, the inmates would not ask for anything in return. Now, for the inmates that did give me intel, and the intel was great, that maybe you want to motivate it by a reward system, I'm not 100% for that. I know some people are. I'm not, because their motivation is not about the information they're giving. The motivation is solely about what they can get from that information. So you're going to start finding out that when an inmate needs something, they'll start giving you bogus intel because, again, they want whatever you're giving them. So I know there's a little bit of a reward method there, but for me, the best information I ever got, again, never on challenge, but the best information I ever got was information that was volunteered to me and the inmate never asking for anything in return. But that's a great question. I mean, I'm sure, have you ever had incidences where, you know, you did rely on an inmate because of the circumstances, and how were you able to alleviate that reliance?
So, I mean, part of the challenge, I think, and when you are short on resources, is that the offenders can be seen as a resource. So one of the programs that we had was we were teaching some of the offenders to be CNAs. So sort of a nursing assistant. It was a full program that we ran, and they did a lot of the work with our hospice patients. They did a lot of work with, you know, those long-term care required type patients that were sundowning. They were there and available to help, you know. So we had situations where we had workers that we had gotten close to because they were working sort of side by side with us, helping us as we had to maneuver through the different clinical needs. And, you know, sometimes it's a matter of taking out the dirty laundry or the dirty linens or whatever that is. And, you know, it was tough, I think, for not just myself, because in my mind, when they say, oh, Miss Alleyne, can you talk to the captain to see if, you know, he could help me with X, Y, Z? You're like, oh, you know, this is a hard worker. I know this person's good. And like, you would think like, okay, well, let me just give a good word to the captain, right? But when you do that, it creates a situation, whether you realize it or not. And sometimes it's not going above and beyond. Sometimes it's, hey, you know, could this person be considered for something? But the fact that that request came from a reputable person may give him or her sort of leverage over any other offender who might have qualified for something. So I found that, yes, it can be challenging even in the simplest circumstances where you feel like, you know, this offender works really hard. They're doing this, this, and that to kind of help us out because we're short-staffed. And so that shift in reliance, I think, has to come from actually getting the resources you need, but also in the process of the training, letting them know that although you're getting this training, this does not change the expectation that you have of that offender. And you've got to be a strong person, I think, to really set that boundary and maintain that boundary.
Well, I think the key of what you said is that expectation, because at that point, if you set the expectation, the inmate can't say any favors. They can't say, because no, this is what's expected of you to be in this position. And the moment you kind of challenge that, then you get removed and I'll get somebody else. I mean, that's the key. You set that level right there. And you know what? You mentioned something also in that dialogue about standing up for an inmate to some extent. Sometimes we can recognize we're being played. Like both of us just gave great advice on, how words could be strategically employed and why you have to be careful of what you accept, because it could be a submissive gesture. But sometimes, let's say, the game's already in the process and you wind up realizing that you started defending an inmate, for no reason, like an inmate gets in trouble, they did something totally wrong. And then you go ahead and you feel a certain way about having to write them up or having to, maybe you have to talk to another officer, say, do me a favor, can you not write them up? I mean, that's another thing. When you're doing your job and if you feel like an inmate did something wrong and you have to write them up, but you feel a certain way about writing them up, you should go ahead and ask yourself, what's up with that relationship? Because technically you can't you got a job to do. So why is it only for this one? Like, why is it that you have no problem writing up every other inmate on the unit, but here comes inmate Smith and you're feeling a certain way? For the first time ever, you're thinking about not writing the person up. What kind of relationship is that? And I'm sure that's great advice for even the civilian staff. If you're ever hesitant in doing something that you should be doing, that's when you have to ask yourself why, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, so I know, like, we had a worker, she was amazing, but, she took advantage of an opportunity that presented itself. And in my mind, how I always question, how did we let our guard down? And how did we not keep closer eyes on this person, right? And that was, like, for me, one of those real live situations where it was like, so this is how the manipulation happens. Here are some of the things. Here's a live version of everyone trusted this person. Why did we trust her, right? Like, why is it that this person wasn't going through the search process when she was going back to her unit, when she left the clinic? Like, there were just all these questions that came up sort of after the fact. And I think it is when you start to forget, right? You start to take for granted that you are still in an institutional environment and that not everyone's intentions are good intentions. I'm not saying all inmates are bad. I'm not saying all inmates are good. I'm saying you have to remember where you are and understand that when an opportunity presents itself, sometimes they can't help but take the opportunity. And if we are kind of keeping ourselves in line with what we really should be doing in the course of our jobs, we won't have to get worried about those feelings that come up because you've got to write something up. Did I feel bad when she was fired? Absolutely. I was like, I didn't expect that from her. I'm like, but why am I taking that personal? I don't know that girl from nowhere, but it was one of those times where you're disappointed because maybe you've had a conversation with the person or you've established a rapport with the person. You come in the morning, that they're cleaning up, that you can rely on them to get all the blood off the wall or all the feces off the floor, like all those things that you tend to not take for granted when you've had someone who did a crappy job before, right? And so here are these little things that kind of get you tied in or pulled in. And then when you kind of get that disappointment that they've done something they shouldn't have been doing, I think it's always important to sort of check yourself to figure out what happened in that situation and why you feel some kind of way about it. I mean, certainly after the fact and seeing how things unfolded, you're like, all right, well, it is what it is. But, there's still sort of that feeling of, why would that person do that? Why would the inmate do that? But it's that reminder that, hey, listen, just in case you forgot, you are still in prison. And this is the kind of shit that they do. And you've got to be on your P's and Q's at all times. You cannot take for granted that because this offender is kind of always displaying good behavior around you, that they don't have something else going on. There's usually some sort of secondary gain in the midst and sometimes we just need to figure it out, or time will tell us.
Well, you're 100% correct. You know how we mentioned before that an inmate may say that I'll only do this for you? Well, we have to realize that we never can put the inmate on a pedestal where they feel that they're the only ones that can do that job either, because if that's the case, then we're also putting ourselves in a position of obligation, because that inmate can quickly use that as leverage. I mean, you don't want to, have an inmate who's specially trained to do all these things, and then the moment they get in trouble, you start to hesitate, not because, of this unprofessional rapport, but the fact is you become so reliant on the inmate that, the work that can only get done can only be done by that individual, and that becomes a problem, because now that's where the facility is kind of in obligation, So, I mean, we could do what we can on a personal level, but there's also times where, you may have that inmate that is the only one qualified to do things. A lot of places, the facilities are ran by inmate labor. And you may have inmates that are good at what they do. But at the end of the day, is sometimes people got to neutralize them and remind them, hey, stop. Because at the end of the day, I don't care. I'll fire you. I'll do whatever I can. And, but then you may get a supervisor that may say, hey, we need him. Don't tell me that. Because that could happen. I mean, I've seen it where the facilities, run on that inmate labor, and you fire the wrong inmate and they don't have, like, let's say another inmate plumber who's that good. They'll pull that inmate out of lock, and that to me is like, hey, you're giving that inmate power. The real thing about here, if you notice, it is obligation, but obligation, like we mentioned, is a shift of control and power. You know what I mean? I come in as an inmate, I have no power. So one of the ways to get it back is I need people to owe me something, because that's the way I get power back. And it's very slow and subtle. And sometimes it really is taking the time and becoming the best at something to the point where they do wind up being relied on by, staff, because, that person can do that job. But at any time, like, I don't know. I mean, I would always tell people, because this is actually something that may be worth a later discussion, but maybe something worth exploring because you tapped in on something. And even though I want to make this a short video, I'm going to have to address this real quick, is maybe we have to be careful how much we praise inmates for the work they do. Because if we praise them to the point where they feel that they're the only people that could do that job, you yourself are putting them on that pedestal where that inmate's going to think, well, I could get away with some things because obviously I'm not that easily replaced. So, I mean, yes, you could be thankful for what the inmate does, but you also have to somehow balance the fact that you mess up, I'm not going to fight for you either. So, again, very tough. But thanks for bringing that up, because I think sometimes we put ourselves in that position. Have you ever, I mean, again, maybe I'm sounding heartless here, but if you had an employee that you saw constantly praising that inmate to the point where they were telling the inmate, yeah, you're the only inmate that could really do this work, how would you address that employee?
Well, certainly I would pull that employee aside and just have a conversation about them, just of, sort of the dynamic they're creating with the offender, as well as, what is happening on the back end, because I'm usually concerned about, so when other inmates feel as though this offender has a particular relationship with someone, they can gain favors, or they're getting praised for stuff. You never know what's happening on the back end from a security perspective with that offender when he gets back to, or she gets back to the housing unit. How are other offenders perceiving that relationship, or how are they going to try to use that offender to gain access or compromise security some other kind of way? So I'm always thinking about what else is happening. So it makes sense for me that I'm going to pull that staff person aside and just have a conversation about it, because they may not understand the broader implications of what that you're doing such a great job. Thank you so much. We appreciate you so much. I think, yes, you can give some positive reinforcement, but I think there is a line to how much of that you do.
Yeah, and I don't think that's something we've ever discussed on our show before. It just happened to be developed as we went through this, but we may want to be careful of how much we praise the inmates, because we may not be realizing we could put them on such a high pedestal that they may feel that they have carte blanche. And again, you can still be cordial, be appreciative, but not to the point where you're putting that inmate on such a high level that you kind of eliminate that sense of that, okay, they're just another inmate, because universal precaution is inmate's an inmate, sad to say, but it's true. Hey, Connie, you have anything you want to say in closing?
I would just say I enjoy having these conversations, because every time we talk about stuff, it always opens the door for other things that we didn't necessarily plan on getting into. And yeah, it kind of prepares us for the next show. So I like it.
Yeah, I think actually, you know, what's funny is there's something, I think there's a couple of things that we could explore from this. Now, I've covered obligation before. I have a whole inmate manipulation course, but we actually created a very unique perspective in some of the things that we talked about, including an inmate saying, hey, supervisors on the unit, and just now about how you praise an inmate. I don't think I've ever, in the 700-something videos we have, ever discussed how we have to be careful how we praise. Again, being appreciative and praise is really two different terms. And if you're in the comments, and you want to comment, maybe you could tell me the difference between appreciating someone for what they're doing or praising them. And does that matter in this profession? I mean, that's a whole nother topic worth exploring. But guys, just real quick, the basic thing about obligation, it's a shift of control. And at the end of the day, you have to have that perception of control. So don't lose even an inch of it, because it doesn't matter. That inch could become a yard, could become a whole stadium. And eventually you're going to wonder, what the hell am I doing? How did I get down this path? So obligation is a very slow and subtle game, but it opens the door to a lot more. So as always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. The bell's going to notify you every time I post up a video. Also, don't forget podcasts, Conversations with Connie, Fly Behind the Wall. She's the owner and founder of Civilians Correction Academy, where you can find more dialogue like this. If you have anybody in need of training, it's great. Definitely something facilities should be looking into. And then the Tier Talk venues, Keepers of Chaos, you know, just a bunch of stuff that you can explore to kind of further your knowledge in the correction profession. As always, guys, stay safe.